stands up and he reads a letter on behalf of the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, a man named Moses Sessions. And he effectively asks the new president, will my people, we Jews, who have been hounded and hated and harassed for centuries, especially in Europe, will we be safe here? And Washington writes back to this man a letter called, that addressed to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, one of the great documents in American history. And Washington says that his government will give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. He prays, may the children of the stock of Abraham sit in safety under their own vine and fig, and let there be none to make them afraid. He ends the letter with this line, may the Lord of all mercies scatter light and not darkness, and make all of us useful in our own vocations and happy in his own everlasting way. Throughout American history, the forces of pluralism have put their stake in the ground for a nation where people from diverse backgrounds come from all over the world to lift up a country. So in the 1850s and 1860s, when the Know Nothing Party was running rampant with the single plank in its platform that Catholics do not belong, it was Abraham Lincoln who stood up against them. And in the late 19th century, when Jews and Catholics were pouring into the nation through Ellis Island, and people were saying, these can never be Americans, Jane Addams writes that our democracy is at stake in welcoming these newcomers as citizens and as participants. The civil rights movement, at its heart, is an interfaith movement. Martin Luther King Jr. learns from Mahatma Gandhi. He goes to India, witnesses the stunning religious diversity of India, comes back to his little pulpit in Montgomery, Alabama in 1959 on Palm Sunday, says this prayer, "O God, our Heavenly Father, we call you this name. We know some call you Allah. We know some call you Brahma. We know some call you Elohim. We know some call you the unmoved mover." And in our present day, it was George W. Bush who first went to a mosque just 48 or 72 hours after 9/11 and declared that Muslims were a welcome and precious part of this nation, and Islam was a religion of peace. And I have to tell you something, I have kids and I felt safer for them that day. Barack Obama says in his inaugural address, "We know in America our patriarch heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, of Jews and Hindus and non-believers. And because we have been through those bitter chapters of segregation and civil war, we know that a shrinking planet can make us feel more united, and that one day America will play its role as a force for peace in the world once again." America at its best is a nation that stands up for the idea that people from all backgrounds come here. They build a nation of equal dignity and mutual loyalty. And I have to tell you, I think right now, the stakes could not be higher. I think we are at a kairos, a supreme moment in the idea of America as a world house or as an interfaith community. Why? First of all, America, scholars tell us, is maybe the most religiously diverse nation in human history. More people from more different religious backgrounds have gathered in this single political entity than in any other political entity at any time in human history. That is a stunning fact. We're also the most religiously devout nation in the West. Religion counts here in major ways in any national campaign. In the vast majority of local political campaigns, religion is a highly salient theme. Our rates of believing in God, of going to church or synagogue or mosque, of saying grace before meals, our growth in secular students associations, in humanist societies, which is an orientation around religion, significantly higher than elsewhere in our sister countries in Europe, Australia, Canada. Religion matters in America. And we live in a time of global religious conflict. Right? In Syria, in Afghanistan, in Northern Ireland, in South Asia, in Egypt, in the Middle East, on and on and on. So why is this all connected? Very simple. Diaspora groups from all of those conflicts live right here in the United States. Right here in Orange County. Right here at UC Irvine. So here's the question, my fellow Americans. is the United States going to be simply an extension of the theater of religious wars of elsewhere? Or are we going to build something different here? Something new? Something that we catch a glimpse in that story of Mario's in the dentist chair, saying, in this country, on this soil, we have an opportunity to have a different kind of conversation about religion, a different kind of conversation about our identities. And actually, a kind of conversation, a kind of engagement that doesn't continue the patterns of elsewhere, but might perhaps change them. Because I'll tell you, the single most dangerous thing about the times in which we live is the aura of inevitability that is gathering around religious conflict. This notion that Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland can only always fight. Hindus and Muslims in India can only always fight. Or Jews and Muslims in the Middle East can only always fight. I think one of the most important roles America plays in the world today is to give the lie to that notion, is to say, I'm sorry, that's simply fiction, because there is a place on the planet where people who are at each other's throats elsewhere work together as doctors in hospitals, play together on Little League teams, work together on PTAs. Does that mean we agree on everything? Of course not. By the way, the definition of diversity is not interesting ethnic foods. The definition of diversity is living in the same society with people you disagree with profoundly and finding a way to work with them on other things. What else do we think diversity is? Except the sense that we are going to have profound disagreements on fundamental things, and we are going to have to figure out how to be a functioning and healthy society anyway. I'm pretty convinced that in the 21st century, religion can be one of four things. It can be a bunker of isolation. You can take the stones of your faith or your philosophical identity and you can build around yourself a bunker and try to let nothing else in. It can be a barrier of division. It can be a bomb of destruction. That's what fills the evening news every night. Or it can be a bridge of cooperation. Here's the thing. Bridges don't fall from the sky, and they don't rise from the ground. People build bridges. Good doesn't just happen. People make good happen. So, if America, if the 21st century is going to be defined more by bridges between people who orient around religion differently than bombs or barriers or bunkers, we're going to have a critical mass of people building those bridges. Interfaith Youth Corps, the organization that I'm proud to run, works almost exclusively on college campuses because we believe that just like a previous generation of young people stood up and called themselves civil rights workers and built a civil rights movement, a previous generation stood up and said they were human rights activists and built a human rights movement, and a generation now is standing up and saying we're environmentalists and building an environmentalist movement, that we are watching a generation of young people stand up and say we are interfaith leaders. And we are going to learn the framework, the knowledge base, and the skill set to build bridges between people who orient around religion differently for the very simple reason that we refuse to forfeit this territory to those who are invested in building barriers or bombs. The reason that we work on college campuses is because there needs to be a place where those young people learn the science, the art, and the craft of interfaith leadership. There needs to be classes in this, concentrations in this. You ought to be able to major in religion at the University of California at Irvine and get a concentration in interfaith leadership. And the most beautiful thing about a college campus is that there's no place on earth where you go from idea to reality faster. So once you take classes at the Center for Citizen Peacebuilding, once you take classes in the Religious Studies program, you can walk across the quad to Dr. Parham's office in the Student Affairs Building, and you can start a student organization focused on your interest area. That's how you came up with that the interfaith service learning programs of the past couple of years, because students took what they were learning in classes and they applied them in the micro-civil society of a college campus. So what would the world look like? What would America look like if every college campus engaged its religious diversity in the same way that UCI is engaging it, with the Olive Tree Initiative, with the Living Peace campaigns, right? What if America's 3,000 four-year schools of higher education decided that interfaith cooperation was going to be a chief value? Just like environmentalism is a core value, just like multiculturalism is a core value, just like service learning is a core value. And it's the dream we have at Interfaith Youth Corps. And one of the reasons that I wanted to come here today is to watch what you guys are doing, because there are initiatives sprouting up here everywhere. And I've had as intellectually rich and rigorous a set of conversations with your students here as I've had anywhere in my time as leader of Interfaith Youth Corps. I think you ought to be proud of the kind of initiatives that UCI is running, and the kind of folks like Karina Hamilton and Kelly Smith and Vice Chancellor Parham and the students especially here and what they're doing. This is a jewel of a place in this work of interfaith cooperation. What are the raw materials of this bridge? Right, if we're going to talk about bridges of cooperation, we have to have materials from which they are made. I want to give you 3 ideas of those materials. I actually want to start this with the story of the Dalai Lama. And Karina Hamilton and I have been going back and forth now for many months about this trip. She leads the Dalai Lama Scholars Program here, and it's been Dalai Lama scholars that have done a lot of your interfaith service on this campus. And it made me think about one of the most precious moments in my life, which was a few minutes with the Dalai Lama in the summer of 1998. Interfaith Youth Corps was just starting, and my mentor, a Catholic monk named Brother Wayne Teasdale, happened to be close with the Dalai Lama, and he said, "You should go ask for His Holiness's blessing on Interfaith Youth Corps." I was going to visit my grandmother in India anyway that year, so we took a flight up to Delhi, a train to Chandigarh, and a bus to Kangra, and then a taxi up to Dharamsala. It was a long trip. You know what they tell you? Everybody tells you about India? Drink lots of water. You know what nobody tells you? That the bus driver never stops for bathroom breaks. So consider yourself warned. So my friend Kevin Colville and I sit at the feet of His Holiness. We have a few minutes. And he says, "You're a Muslim?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "You know, there's a story of Muslims in Tibet that I want to share with you." One day, one of his predecessor Dalai Lamas is looking out of his palace in the central city of Tibet, and he sees a man on a mountain doing a series of prostrations. Had no idea what it was, and so he told his people to bring this man to him. And so they brought this man, and the Dalai Lama says, who are you and what are you doing? And the man says, "Well, I'm a Muslim, and I've been a part of this group of Muslims who's come through Tibet to trade goods every few months, and a group of us have settled here. And I pray 5 times a day, but there's no mosque in Tibet. So I found the highest ground that I can find, which I believe is the closest to heaven, the closest to God, and I offer my prayers there." And the Dalai Lama says, "So tell me about Islam." And they have this conversation about their religions, and at the end of the conversation, the Dalai Lama says, "You are welcome to stay in my country. I believe your religion will be an enrichment here." And he has his archers send 4 arrows in the same general direction, and those 4 arrows become the outlines of the Muslim community in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet. So the thing that comes to my mind as the Dalai Lama is telling me this story is there is a massive theological divide between Muslims and Buddhists. I mean, the Shahada begins with the line, "La ilaha illallah," there is no God but God. Monotheism, God, is at the absolute center of the Muslim tradition, and the Buddha never says a word about God. Many, many Buddhists don't believe in God. So I'm thinking to myself, I ask him, I say, "Your Holiness, what did your predecessor Dalai Lama and this Muslim talk about? What do you mean that they found this similarity?" And the Dalai Lama looks at me and he gives that kid-like smile, and he's like, "Compassion, the centrality of compassion." I thought to myself, that is so beautiful, right? Because these two figure out quite quickly that they actually disagree on a massive theological matter. They don't think it's unimportant, they don't dismiss it, they simply find something else they agree about. And compassion or mercy is at the absolute center of the Muslim tradition, as it is in the Buddhist tradition, right? In Buddhism, one achieves nirvana and can choose to come back to earth to teach compassion, and then you are given the name Bodhisattva. Thich Nhat Hanh famously said to Martin Luther King Jr., "We Buddhists consider you a Bodhisattva. Does your compassion not extend to us in Vietnam?" In Islam, the most common prayer is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the all-merciful, the ever-merciful. Right? The Quran says that mercy is God's signature, his quintessential attribute. It says that God sent the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, to be nothing but a special mercy upon all the world. And so the Dalai Lama and this Muslim make a decision that they are going to focus not on this massive theological difference, but instead on this massive ethical shared value. And it feels to me, in a diverse democracy, disagreement is simply part of the air. If you jump in the pool, you are going to get wet. So what are we going to do with our disagreements on the issue of life and choice, on the issue of who gets to get married, on the issue of who's going to heaven, on the issue of where the line is drawn in the Middle East? It seems to me we have a decision to make. Are we going to spend all of our time talking about that disagreement? Or are we going to be able to make the move that the Dalai Lama and this Muslim made in Lhasa several centuries ago, which is to recognize the importance of the disagreement and to find other things that we think are precious and in common? People say to me all the time, Ibu, why don't you talk about the elephant in the room? And of course, there are different elephants for different people. For some people, it's the issue of the pro-life issue. For some people, it's salvation. For some people, it's the Middle East. But always, and especially when you talk about religious diversity, there's an elephant in the room. Well, here's one of the reasons we don't focus entirely on that elephant at Interfaith Youth Corps. Because there's other animals in the zoo. And if all you do is talk about the elephant, if all you do is talk about the last 60 years and the patch of land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, then every animal starts to look like the elephant. The peacock and the giraffe and the tiger, which is to say, you reduce the interactions across religious civilizations that have lasted for centuries to one piece. It feels to me like in a mature, diverse democracy, frankly, the diverse democracy that people around the world look to as a model, we are going to have to learn to disagree on fundamental things and come together on other things. For me, that story of the Dalai Lama and that Muslim some centuries ago in the palace in Lhasa is a quintessential moment in doing that. Number two, we're going to have to stand up for each other. That's what I love about the story of George Washington and Moses Sessions. George Washington is telling this guy, look man, I'm going to stand up for you, right? Me personally and my government, I'm going to stand up for you. You know, I want to tell you a story. A couple years ago at Interfaith Youth Corps, I'm thinking about this because this kid I'm going to tell you a story about actually is in LA now, just got a job working for the LA Times. I mean, who knew? People still get jobs at newspapers, right? God willing, that will continue. So this was during the Cordoba House incident, summer of 2010, better known as the Ground Zero Mosque. And it was busy and trying times at Interfaith Youth Corps. It was a time when, you know, I was especially doing a lot of media. I'd known Imam Faisal well. I was kind of stunned by the discourse around Cordoba House, stunned that this guy who, you know, was probably the most gentle imam in North America was somehow branded as a radical. And so I'd be on TV a lot talking about this, and I got my fair share of swipes, and you know, every once in a while I'd see the words Ibu Patel Muslim extremist online, or Ibu Patel Muslim radical. Once in a while I would see Ibu Patel Muslim terrorist. I'm like, seriously people? I'm the person who started an interfaith organization? I mean, like, I promise you there are easier targets to find for this, you know? So we started a kind of a clipping service within IFYC, and we gave this young intern, Nick Lang, look for his byline in the LA Times. We gave him the job of clipping the highest profile kind of anti-Muslim articles of the day. And he would hand me the file at the end of the day. So basically, if we were called by CNN or